Hello, Nick, it's Thursday. Nick, right now I'm doing laundry, so you gotta come with me. Alright, Nick, so in your video yesterday you talked to me about poetry. Good job with that, by the way. So, Nick, a couple weeks ago, I wanted to try to do this thing where I did my laundry all the time. It hasn't really worked out. You were trying to sweet talk me into believing that rhyme is the most important thing. I think you know that I understand the importance of rhyme. Otherwise, I wouldn't have mentioned it at all. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a lovely use of language. I agree with the things that you're saying. Where would we be without it? I don't know. We wouldn't have Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. You're right. Or many other beautiful poems. However, the poems of which you made mention are all very old. And what I'm trying to say is, reading poetry and appreciating beautiful poetry sort of covers a large span of history. Writing poetry is different, because writing poetry, you're not trying to emulate something that's been in existence for like over 100 years. You're not writing poetry in like the 1870s. You're writing poetry in 2012. It sort of brings me to another point that you need to understand about poetry, is that you can't write poetry without reading poetry. You have to read it to gain a better understanding of what has been written. And also, one of the most important parts about reading poetry is finding stuff that you like. Finding styles of writing that you enjoy reading, or styles of writing not that you'd like to recreate, but that you'd like to imitate, but also make better. So, the next important thing that I'm going to tell you about poetry is that you have to steal relentlessly. You take things that you like, and you love the things you took. Regina Spektor. Honestly, if someone writes in a certain style with a certain meter or with a certain tone, and you find that to be really beautiful, then you should try and come up with a way to match that, but also to make it distinctly your own. And you combine the beautiful things that you find in the world. I could tell that you had the gray on your mind when you wrote the poem that you wrote, because you said this day twice. But aside from that, like, it had that same feel, and not too long after I saw the movie The Gray, I wrote a few poems actually in that similar style as well. I'll see if I can find you one. I'd really like some fun dip. It took me like 20 minutes, but I found it. Today is the first day of the world. We will fight and steal. We will bear all, and we will bear nothing. The shadow of the lark touches the grass around us. Today is the last day of the world. We will sit still. The calm of the air will find our deepest. The birch trees drink the cool water and sunlight. I don't think it's super good, but I was just trying to paint a picture of maybe the end of the world. It's funny that we both wrote poems about the end of the world based on a poem that was in The Gray. Like, I think that's kind of cool, because that poem isn't about the end of the world, it's about the end of a man. So the thing that I noticed about your poem this time is that it didn't have any metaphor. Metaphor is a comparison. You can achieve it a couple of ways in poetry. One is the simile. It uses like or as. So to say that a book is like a flashlight is a simile. Or a river runs as quickly as a mammoth is also a simile, because it uses like or as. Specifically as. Metaphor, on the other hand, is a comparison that is drawn in just showing the two images. The classic example of this is not a poem that I particularly am fond of, but it says, the fog rolls in on little cat feet. And it's sort of like comparing fog to a cat. I just think that's like sort of a tired example. The fun thing about metaphor is that your comparisons can and probably should be sort of a stretch. They should be strange, but also very specific. The reason for this is because the more specific something is, the more relatable it will be to other people. And it's important that your poems be relatable. Always be aware of readers. Always. Look how beautiful. The coolest part is the dispenser, though. Comes in this box. You just slide them out. Now, poems can have extended metaphors. An extended metaphor is a metaphor that will last an entire poem. A couple weeks ago, there was a girl in my poetry class that wrote a poem that was an extended metaphor comparing sex and movies. But metaphors don't always have to permeate the entire poem. In my poem that I read you in my last video, I compared the breaking apart of glasses to the hands of two lovers at the gate of an airport terminal. So this is what I'm going to ask you to do. This time, write a poem, again that doesn't rhyme, again that has a clear idea or thesis or like something that it's trying to say. But this time, I want you to write it in as close to your own voice as you can get. So, just sounds like you're talking almost. But you have to use metaphor. Just make smart and surprising comparisons. We love Brian Andreas. We love him. Sometimes I write poems like Brian Andreas too. Like this one. As the turnstile clicked into place behind him, the porter looked at the lines on his palms and felt his loneliness deepening. Nick, you told me to write a poem about Thanksgiving, but then that was really hard for me because I don't think I've ever written a poem about family before. I tried once. I'm not done with it yet. So, in a last-ditch effort to satisfy your request, I wrote a haiku about Thanksgiving. Because I can't get enough of them. I love haikus. I love them. Thanksgiving's next week. Poor Squanto and Samoset. They had no idea. Nick! I'll see you tomorrow. Excited? Excited for The Hobbit, Nick? Like, this is excitement, okay? Like, no, wait. No, this is excitement. It fits inside this little circle, okay? And, like, the feeling that I feel takes a circle and, like, mushes it up and eats it for breakfast and then spits it out and microwaves it for lunch and then eats it again. The feeling that I feel takes excitement and digests it in the worst way possible.